Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Ladden, and I'm the president of the Alexandria Historical Society. I want to welcome you here tonight to the first lecture of the 2017-2018 lecture series for the Alexandria Historical Society. I'm the new president, and before we get too deeply into Dan Lee and his topic tonight on fish and Alexandria's story, I'd like to have all of the members who are board members of the Alexandria Historical Society to stand up for just a moment. Okay. Now, if you wouldn't mind saying who you are, my name, I tricked you, please start with Steve.
Steve Kimball.
Katie Kennedy. Kristen Moon. Bonnie Davis. Debbie Ackerman.
Thank you all. Debbie Ackerman has been the president of the Alexandria Historical Society for 3 years. So I'd like you to join me and say thank you, Debbie. I don't plan to do this for 3 years. Anyway, you found us. We're very happy about that. And thank you for putting up with the fact that we had to change venues tonight. Our next lecture, which is scheduled for October 25, will be over at the Lyceum. Mark those words. That particular lecture, we're negotiating what exactly it will be. Okay, so stay tuned. If you're not a member, please let us know that you're interested to be on our mailing list, meaning electronic mail, so that we can keep you informed of that. Otherwise, all members will know about all of the things coming up. In addition, we have a perk, which I'd like Audrey to tell us about. Audrey, would you tell us what's coming up in November?
Sure. On November 18th, we are going to be offering a special tour from slavery to freedom. We will be joining forces. It will be the Office of Historic Alexandria, Diamond Springs Historical Society, and Mount Vernon. The tour will be from 1 to 4. It will begin at Mount Vernon. You'll be able to see the exhibit on slavery, lives down together. We'll see that exhibit. We'll also have a talk at the slave burial ground by the Mount Vernon archaeologist. We will then have lunch at Mount Vernon, and then we will board a bus and we will go to Gum Springs, and then we will conclude our tour at the Freedmen's and Hunchman Cemetery. As a perk to Alexandria Historical Society members, you will be able to sign up for the tour 1 week in advance of it being offered to the public. The cost for the tour will be $50, and it will be from 1 to 4 p.m. It will go rain or shine. So we'll put out on our website, and we'll be letting you know when you can sign up for that tour.
Okay, thank you very much. So you can't register yet, but you can register soon. And if you pay attention to our website or to your website, correct?
Right.
Office of Historic Alexandria, you can register through them, not through us, but we'll keep you informed of when registration is open. Also, I'd like to thank all of you who are members of the Alexandria Historical Society. We are a member organization. So all those people who stood up, and there's one out in the hallway who was taking money from those of you who aren't members, Mark Walker. Mark? Yeah. Could you identify yourself, please, by showing up in here? Anyway, you could talk to any one of us that you saw stand up, including me, and that guy back there in the door, about any issues you might have with us, because we realize that we want to represent your interests and have the kind of programming that you're interested in. Okay, tonight we are lucky to have Dr. Dan Lee. He's the city historian for the city of Alexandria, and Dr. Dan Lee is going to talk about this pretty interesting story about fish. Now, you're obviously here, so you've read the information about what it's going to be about, and I'm not going to tell you that right now, okay? But I will tell you that he is not only the city historian, he's also worked for the Department of Defense Missing Personnel POW Office, and at the University of California, Davis. He's a published author, curated several exhibitions. His bio says 2, including the Chinese in California, which can be seen in the American Memory Collection at the Library of Congress. It's also on the Bancroft Library at the University of California, Berkeley, right, in terms of their website. He received his doctorate and his master's degree in American history from University of California, Berkeley. So let's welcome him.
Thank you.
Can all of you hear me okay? Do I need to use the microphone? No, I don't? Okay. All right, well, maybe I'll get over here. Thank you all for coming. I was a little concerned that with the change in location, no one would come. I do have a couple of anecdotes that were like Lyceum specific, and now I'm like robbed of that. One of them was the fact that John Quincy Adams once spoke in the Lyceum, and one of my graduate school friends is going to be really, really jealous about me being able to speak in the same room as John Quincy Adams. Hopefully he sees the video. You know who you are. The second thing the second anecdote I want to tell you is when I originally came up with the idea for this lecture, I was like, let's call it the scales of history. And my wife said no. My wife is also not here. I probably could use scales of history. Unfortunately for her, she had to listen to me practice this on our vacation through Utah last week. So she knows this by now. So if I could change the slide, this is going to be a very brief outline as to what we're going to talk about. So we're going to start off with the types of fish that were commercially used for fishing in the Potomac. There are actually, at one time, there were 84 different species of fish in the Potomac. One of the last accounts said it was 78. This was in the 1980s. I'm only going to focus on 3, and the reason why I'm going to do that is because these are the ones that were most used for commercial fishing. We're going to talk about who caught them and kind of how that changes over time, and also who ate the fish. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why commercial fishing doesn't exist on the Potomac today. So if we could change the slide. So the first fish, and perhaps the most important fish, is the American shad. This is once the Potomac River's most abundant and economically important fish. It became so depleted in the Potomac that recreational fishers today are required to release them. The American shad is the largest member of the herring family, and its natural habitat is the east coast of North America, from Canada to Florida. Like salmon, American shad returns to the river it was hatched in to spawn. But unlike salmon, it can return to fresh water and back to the ocean for multiple years. For a long time, it played a major role in the ecosystem of the east coast of North America because it provides a critical transition in the food chain by eating tiny plankton, and it provides sustenance for such large predators as bears, bald eagles, ospreys, striped bass, and catfish. Smaller predators, such as young fish and minnows, eat the shad eggs and fry. Now, the Algonquin name for the American shad was tatamaho, which roughly translates to inside out porcupine. Legend has it that an unhappy porcupine asked the Great Spirit to change its form. And the Great Spirit's solution was to turn the porcupine inside out, force it to swim out to sea and back to spawn. Many consumers of American shad, with its 769 bones, would understand the meaning of that legend. And most of the time, apparently, people ate the shad with the bones. Europeans who moved to Alexandria learned from the native peoples here, called the Doge, both how to capture shad and how to cook them. Smoking and drying were the most common methods of preparing the fish. Shad plankings, which I'll show you a picture of doing that a little bit later, are adaptations of an American Indian preparation method, which involves attaching the fish to wooden planks and propping the planks in front of a fire pit to slowly smoke.
The Indian tribe is called the Doge.
Yes.
There's the
D-O-G-G.
Doge Creek by Mount Vernon.
Well, yeah, D-O-E-G-G. And we'll talk about them a little bit later. The second slide is of the American herring. And for many years, herring were considered a cheaper, less attractive byproduct of shad fishing. Accounts tell us of catches of smaller herring left on the riverside, not considered worth the time to process when there were more profitable fish caught in the same haul. Processing the fish includes several simple steps. First, the women and men gutted and separated the fish by size. The next step was drilling, or stirring the herring in a salt-filled vat to draw out the blood and juices. After filling oak or pine casks with alternating layers of fish and salt, the workers allowed the mixture to sit for 5 to 6 hours. The head and the hoops were then pressed onto the barrel to seal it. The workmen and women would then blow air through a bung hole into the barrel to check the barrel for tightness. Any cracks were caulked, and the workers reopened the barrel after 5 or 6 days, when they pressed the fish again to drop any remaining blood pickle, and then put the head of the barrel back on and plugged the bung. The barrel was then ready for market inspection and sale. While salted fish required a bushel of salt per barrel, dry fish needed even more salt. The fish tissues need to be struck through or saturated with salt and then dried. All methods of preserving fish, including drying, pickling, and smoking fish, require the use of salt to retard bacterial growth in the fish tissues. If the fish was properly cured with salt, it could be edible up to 2 years later. But English restrictions on the importation of European salt to Virginia led the colonists to complain that the English salt they were allowed to import was too weak to preserve fish for more than a year. Thousands of herring were caught by seine nets along the more valuable shad and sturgeon and left to rot on the river shore due to a lack of salt. After the Revolutionary War, however, salts from Europe allowed Alexandria's fishers to choose from a wide variety of salts. The salts from Europe, especially Spain and Portugal, were the most sought after. And let's go on to the next slide. So the third fish is sturgeon. Evolutionarily speaking, the Atlantic sturgeon is the oldest of the 3 fish regularly caught in the Potomac. And they are older, not just in terms of an evolutionary timeline, but they can live up to the age of 60. They grow to the length of 14 feet, and they weigh as much as 800 pounds, although they average much less than that. Like humans, they don't reproduce until their teens at the earliest. Unlike shad and herring, they don't swim in schools, which makes catching large numbers of them even more difficult. Like the other 2 fish, though, they do return to freshwater tributaries to spawn. Fisheries along the Potomac developed a peculiar method for catching sturgeon. Fishermen would slowly drag a 30-inch bark hook with a 24-inch curved stem. When the angler felt the long body of a sturgeon against the hook, he jerked it into the fish's body. Starting in the 19th century, sturgeon were fished for meat that was pickled, its eggs were turned into caviar, their skin was converted to leather, and oils from sturgeon were used for paint. In his history and the present state of Virginia, Robert Beverly notes that sturgeon fishers held a special status among the American Indian peoples in the 17th century, as they captured the fish by wrestling them until the fish capitulated. This activity, as you can imagine, was incredibly dangerous, requiring large amounts of strength and aerobic endurance. Sadly, the last Atlantic sturgeon caught in the Potomac was 7 feet long and 170 pounds, and that was in 1970. So let's move on to the next slide. So now comes the question, who caught the fish? The first people are the Algonquins, or at least the first people that we know of. In 1984, a Lewis and Berger Associates archaeological survey discovered prehistoric tools that point to American Indian fishing at Jones Point as early as 3000 BC. That date is suggested by other archaeologists as the time period when salinity levels in the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries stabilized. Constant salinity levels allowed the bay to support large oyster populations, as well as anadromous fish, such as American shad and white perch, to successfully spawn. Anadromous means it can go in both freshwater and saltwater. In the days before European contact, shad and perch went up the Potomac River as far as Great Falls during their spawning seasons. The first people that Europeans encountered on the site of present-day Alexandria are the Dode, an Algonquian people, also known as the Taki, who called Jones Point Osamoic, which means middle fishing place. We seem to think that around 900 AD, archaeologists believed that fish increased its role in the local American Indian diet. Local peoples became increasingly sedentary and sought food which could be stored. The local fish runs coincided with the seasons that saw crop and nut supplies run out. And the Potomac's shoreline changed. In fact, during high tide, the river would rise and cut off Jones Point, from the mainland. On Hunting Creek, seasonal villages were built to exploit spawning fish populations. And while the 1984 study did not find evidence of native settlements on Jones Point from 900 to 1600, the John Smith map of 1608, which unfortunately I just couldn't magnify enough and make it legible, lists a seasonal village on the south bank of Hunting Creek named Asamoah, or Middle Fishing Village. So how did the Doe catch fish? The Doe used a variety of methods to catch local fish. One was luring the fish to the surface for spearing by setting fires in dugout canoes at night. They also trapped fish by building fish weirs, which used wooden stakes to direct the direction the fish swam. If I could get the next slide. So you can see here they direct the fish into narrower and narrower kind of pens, and then spear the fish. While some of these engravings show weirs that were used farther south in Virginia, it's important to note that Europeans who came to present-day Alexandria know their use here. And you can also see them setting fires in their dugout canoes. The fires would attract the fish, because of the light. So Robert Beverly wrote in 1705 when he came here, the larger fish that kept in deep for water, they were put to a little more difficulty to take. But for these they made weirs, that is a hedge of small ribbed sticks or reeds, of the thickness of a man's finger. These they wove together in a row with straps of green oak or other tough wood, so close that the small fish could not pass through. They contrived so that the fish could easily find a passage into those cogs, but could not see their way out again. The Doe also used fish nets for large catches. In his diary, Smith noted that the Doe men confined their activities to fishing, hunting, wars, and such manlike exercise, whereas the women and children do the rest of the work. Let's go into this. So remember when we talked about shad planking? This is in 1893 in Maryland. You can see the technique of attaching the fish to the plank and then having a fire in between. So in Alexandria's early days, even before the incorporation of Alexandria in 1749, the Commonwealth of Virginia recognized the need to regulate and encourage the fishing industry. In 1705, the Commonwealth passed laws to limit the sale of fish to within a 5-mile radius of any market town. The legislature also required fishermen to destroy abandoned weirs and fine fishermen who fished in someone else's fishery without permission. In 1745, the General Assembly decreed that river obstructions, such as dams, mills, hedges, and stone stops, be accompanied by cleared areas that allowed fish to pass. In the early days of Alexandria, the fish of the Potomac River were plentiful, especially the three talked about, the shad, the herring, and the sturgeon. In 1759, one day's catch within a 2-mile area near the Chesapeake yielded 600 sturgeon and 500 shad. In his book, The Bounty of the Chesapeake, James Warden remarked, Potomac fish include sturgeon of 40 to 150 pounds, rockfish of up to 75 pounds, shad of 3 to 6 pounds, carp of 3 pounds, and herring and pike of 2 pounds. There were also perch, mullet, and eels in the Potomac River. Of the herring alone, 400,000 were caught annually, which equals a catch of 80 million pounds. Property owners sometimes rented out their private fisheries. The city also leased out lots at the town fish wharf of Alexandria on an annual basis. Sealed bids had to be submitted to the superintendent of police in early January or February for the season that lasted from March through June. The superintendent also accepted bids for the slow period from June to March. The city fish wharf was in the center of Alexandria, and the lease included the use of a warehouse for curing and storing fish, enough boards, quote, sufficient for a temporary platform usually erected in front of the wharf for cleaning fish, unquote, and the use of the wharf itself. The riverfront was 500 feet long and had many dock berths that extended for the greater part to Union Street, according to the Alexandria Gazette. If I could get So in 1793, George Washington wrote that the Potomac was well stocked with various kinds of fish, in all seasons of the year, and in the spring with shad, herring, bass, carp, perch, sturgeon, etc. in great abundance. The whole shore, in fact, is one entire fishery. Washington's properties included 3 fisheries, which he used to feed the enslaved people he held, and to bring in a reliable source of income. Washington's fisheries, like those of his neighbors, found the briefness and intensity of the spawning season of particular challenge. The 5 to 6 weeks of the fishing season required the laborers to divert their attention from their normal duties to cleaning, preserving, and packing the barrels of fish. Large amounts of salt were used for the operation, and today, a salt house still stands in Mount Vernon, a testament to the fishing's importance to the operation of Washington's properties. Mount Vernon's website claims that Washington needed 375 pounds sterling to break even on the operations of his 5 properties in the area. The 3 fisheries on his properties consistently yielded 200 to 250 pounds sterling a year, and most of this was harvested in the span of 2 months. Fishing, like other industries in the Chesapeake, was halted in 1813 when the British Navy blockaded the bay. Not only did the British prevent Americans from exporting fish, they burned houses and captured and destroyed fishing vessels, some of which they used for their own purposes. Alexandria fish consumers in the early 19th century spanned the spectrum in terms of social race, or social class, race, and religion. Among the many side industries that sprang up in our town related to the fish industry were cookbooks, including Hannah Glass's Art of Cookery, which was published in 1812 here in Alexandria. Glass went into great detail not only on how to cook fish, but methods to check for freshness, and the seasonality of the different fish that were regularly caught in the area. Another product related to the fishing industry was agricultural fertilizer, made out of the offal, shell lime, and fish that Alexandria fisheries supplied. Shell marl left from the dug and earlier peoples also sold as fertilizer. As one property owner claimed in an advertisement, quote, "On the opposite sides of the creek are large banks of the richest shell marl, by which the whole of this land might be rendered very fertile. The marl might be carried in boats to almost any part," unquote. Other industries that thrived in Alexandria included coopers, who built the close to 1 million barrels that were needed by fish packers on the Potomac. In 1810, there were 20 coopers operating in Alexandria. Even in 1835, the Potomac River still yielded immense catches, and it was not uncommon at a good fishery to catch 4,000 shad and up to 300,000 herring at one haul was signed. That year, there were 150 private fisheries on the Potomac. Processing the fish required 6,500 laborers, and 1,350 men navigated 450 vessels. Many of these fisheries use sign nets, and I think that hopefully is the next. Yes, that's the next slide. These large nets varied in length from about 1 to 1,200 yards. They were necessary for netting large catches, and the best fisheries had large meshes to let small herring slip through. The popularity of sign net fishing in Alexandria led to merchants specializing in supplying this type of fishing, or supplying supplies for this technique. Shop owners such as Josiah Davis sold sign twine from India and England, while others, such as Alexandria's Occoquan factory, made sign twine to order. Cordage, which was used to halt the sign nets, was also in demand. In 1897, A. Bartle of Alexandria patented a method of rope making. In 1810, Alexandria had 3 rope walks, where the factories where ropes are spun, which were some of the more valuable manufactures for the city. They were worth $160,000 in 1810 dollars at the time. By 1840, the rope walks employed 25 men. Other major industries in Alexandria that contributed to fishing included shipbuilding, sailmaking, and the sale of ice. Some merchants, such as George Washington, transported their fish in barrels of ice. In hot weather, and remember the time of year, remember March through June is when these fish are harvested. The dangers of spoiling was great, and ice was especially in demand for keeping the fish fresh. In 1820, ice was delivered 6 days a week to customers of the Columbian Ice House. The price was $6 a season, and on Sundays, customers could get their ice until 9 in the morning. Consumers could also contract with the fishery for fresh fish. And in an 1827 Phoenix Gazette advertisement, the firm of Cohagen and Whittle boasted that they had, quote, experienced hands in their employment for the purpose of attending to the selection of family fish in the best manner. If a customer already owned a barrel, the firm could fill it up at the wharf. Another option for Alexandria's fish consumers was Alexandria's early morning market. By early morning, I mean until 9 in the morning. 6 days a week from April until October, and then until 10 in the morning for the rest of the year. As you can imagine, fish was not the only product available at the market. The consumer could purchase seasonal meats, fruits, vegetables, and poultry as well. In 1800, Alexandria passed laws to regulate the operation of the market. Food could only be sold in the market area with the exception of salt beef, pork, and fish. Customers were not allowed to resell fish, and were only allowed to buy enough fish for family consumption, although what they accepted amount wasn't specified. Alexandria also outlawed cleaning fish on the streets, moors, or public docks other than the fish wharf. Those who did clean fish off the fish wharf were required by law to remove the offal immediately. On top of that, the city outlawed putrid fish in the store, home, or yard of a resident. Fishing was not just for subsistence. Alexandria exported its catches to the West Indies, to Baltimore, to Washington, D.C., the southern United States, and the western interior. By 1826, Alexandria had 5 fish inspectors who ensured the quality of Alexandria's fish in the competitive market. Fish inspection in Virginia was legally required as early as 1773. So let's go on to the next slide. So let's talk about the enslaved people of Alexandria and how they became both the producers and the consumers of fish. While this focuses on Fishtown, let's back up a little bit. During the antebellum period, there were approximately 150 fisheries among the Potomac, most of whom used the labor of both free and enslaved African Americans. Starting in 1856, a temporary village called Fishtown would rise up between Princess and Orinoco streets. Today, that location is called Founders Park. Both freed and enslaved African Americans cleaned tons of fish, which they packed into barrels of salt. The fishing season was from March through June, as we talked about, and in January or February, the superintendent of police would auction out the fish boards of Alexandria to the highest bidder. During the spring, rude huts were constructed without windows, since the rented planks were not to be cut. While some of the huts were used for salting and packing fish, many were used as eating and drinking establishments. Fighting and brawls were common, and many families forbid their children from entering Fishtown. The majority of the responsibility for cleaning, salting, and packing the fish fell on the enslaved women, perhaps like the ones seen in this picture. Like so many locations within Alexandria, Fishtown was very susceptible to fire and was wiped out several times, with the most severe being in 1896. I want to track back just a little bit and talk about how economic decline in the late 1820s and the 1830s changed Alexandria's economy. Pretty much what's happened is sugar and tobacco and flour, which had been Alexandria's biggest exports, are kind of drying up. And so, no longer a prime exporter of grain and flour, Alexandria began to rely on 2 industries that had been part of Alexandria since 1749. And those 2 industries are fishing and slavery. Enslaved African Americans not only made up the majority of the fishing industry's workforce, they also inadvertently became one of its primary consumers, as local domestic slave trading firms purchased large amounts of herring as a cheap source of food for the people they intended to sell. Enslaved people who worked as fishermen were held in high esteem by other enslaved people, as they considered it one of the better assignments. Fishing offered freedom from field labor, along with a chance to see beyond the borders of the plantation. In some cases, slaveholders rented enslaved people to other fisheries. While enslaved people had to bring home a fixed wage, and oftentimes additional earnings were theirs to keep. For example, in 1827, the first fishery above Alexandria advertised for, quote, 60 strong-bodied men to work as sign haulers. Another advertisement claimed, owners of slaves will do well by calling on me, as persons of color will be preferred. Good wages will be given. Now, I don't want to imply that enslaved people working in the fishing industry had it easy. We know, for instance, that George Washington had his enslaved workers draw night and day during fishing season. According to Mount Vernon account book, Washington did try to compensate his enslaved laborers by paying them a pint of rum for their work. Not only did the enslaved population of Alexandria provide most of the labor for the fishing industry, but it was also its primary consumer, not necessarily by choice. Mount Vernon claims that the enslaved people who served Washington's received a quota of 20 fish a month, and that stocking enough fish to feed the labor on the farms and plantation was the primary goal of each fishing season. Between 1810 and 1830, enslaved people made up approximately 16% of Alexandria's population. As the historian Walter Johnson notes, the sale of people as property was a process of turning people into products. Accordingly, traders packaged the people they held before they reached the slave pens. This included removing heavy chains and cuffs from the limbs of what they considered their property. It also included washing and shaving / cutting hair and, quote, feeding up as a means to distinguish one person from those being sold elsewhere. Johnson notes that not only did traders hire medical care for those they sought to sell, for perhaps the only times in their lives, but they also, quote, set the slaves to dancing and exercising to make their muscles tone and make their skin shine to give the appearance of health with the use of sweet oil or greasy water. As many of you know, Franklin and Armfield, the South's largest slaving firm, was based in Alexandria and bought barrels of herring in bulk as a cheap means of making the people they sought to sell appear well-nourished. Dealers such as Franklin and Armfield also used salted fish as an economical way to keep enslaved people alive during the forced marches or sales from the Chesapeake to the Deep South. In fact, as slavery in the Chesapeake evolved from focusing on extracting the labor of the enslaved person to making profits from the sale of that person's body, the role of fish in that transition needs to be examined further, especially since that transition coincides with or is caused by the depletion of soil in the Upper South. And in comparison in terms of how much cheaper herring was to other forms of food, Thomas Jefferson noted in his farm book that a barrel of fish was half the price of a barrel of pork. Shad sold for 6 to 7 cents a pound, sturgeon sold for 3, and herring sold for less than a cent for the same weight. Now, after the Civil War, fishing was one of the industries that was taken up in large numbers by newly freed Alexandrians. They already had the skills to catch the fish, and the equipment was cheap enough that it could be bought outright or leased. Almost just as important to Alexandria's fishing industry as Fishtown was the Burg, an African-American neighborhood that sprang up during the Civil War. Founded by people who escaped slavery from Petersburg, the Burg bordered Fishtown, and many of Fishtown's workers lived there. Petersburg was one of the first black neighborhoods to develop north of King Street, which at the time was the economic center of Alexandria. The Burg, along with other neighborhoods, transformed the racial geography of Alexandria during and after the Civil War and remains part of Alexandria today. It covers an area of about 15 blocks, with North St. Asaph Street as its western boundary, Madison Street as its northern boundary, Princess its southern, and North Fairfax its east. There are no remaining structures, however, from the historic period. Let's go on to the last two slides. So now let's talk about the decline. In May 26, 1884, an Alexandria Gazette article said, "This has been a poor season known to the Potomac fishermen for many years. Fisheries that had been long profitable, including Ferry Landing, Lloyd House, Stony Point, and Freestone Point, lost on average $7,000 that year. The only exceptions were Clifton, the Gums, and Windmill Point." The article attributed the success of the three fisheries to the specifics of their location, being, quote, shallow and flatly formed, together with a combination of circumstances such as the great rains in February and March, and northwest winds that prevailed during the month of April, end quote. The article also credited the U.S. Fish Commission and the use of artificial plants for saving a decent harvest of branch herring, saying that without intervention, the Potomac would have had to cease as a location for large fisheries. This, by the way, is the government regulator on a house on the dock. It was common at the time for property owners to lease their fishing rights and facilities for a year at a time. Maryland sites usually went for between $500 and $1,000 a year, and fisheries on the Virginia side usually went between $1,000 to $3,500. But in 1884, the scarcity of fish led to many of the fisheries being left vacant, or rented at a severely reduced price. The scarcity affected not only the herring population, but also the shad, leading to the lowest fish harvest that had been recorded in Alexandria's history. Now, what led to this decline? Well, we can trace some of the decline to the dumping of sewage into the Potomac River. According to the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, the first sewer system in Washington was built in 1810 and flushed its contents into the nearest stream. By 1894, the U.S. Public Health Service documented that, quote, at least at certain times of the year, the river is so loaded with sediments as to be unfit for bathing as well as for drinking and cooking purposes. It contains fetal bacilli at all times, unquote. The industry at times seems to have recovered, for in the early 1900s, one observer noted, one has not seen the most picturesque feature of the Potomac fisheries, but has not seen shad fishing at night. The nets are laid for every run of the tide, by night as well as day. By day, the lines of huge corks sustaining the nets across the channel are easily seen and avoided by passing steamers. At night, these same reaches of nets would be invisible were it not for the gillers, as fishermen are called on the Potomac, who have extra large floaters at both ends of each net, and on them make fast lighted lanterns. To look across the broad waters of the river on nights when the shad are running is to mistake the vision for a bit of Venice, a fairy city twinkling in the darkness. In 1911, fisheries surveys from 1898 to 1911 of the upper Potomac found 18 species of fish. So then, what caused the decline? Again, there are probably three prime culprits. One is pollution, two is dams, and three is overfishing. The pollution was at its worst in the late 1950s to the early 1970s, when the upper freshwater tidal Potomac received the river's largest wastewater and stormwater inputs, which was often lethal to most fish, and especially lethal to migratory fish returning to spawn. The building of dams on the Potomac River led to a loss in spawning habitat. In the 1970s and 80s, the American shad industry collapsed on the East Coast, period. Shad fishing in Maryland closed in 1980, the rest of the Potomac watershed was closed to shad fishing in 1982, and the state of Virginia closed its remaining shad fisheries in 1993. Despite significant improvements in water quality since the passage of the Clean Water Act in 1972, and a moratorium on harvesting fish from the river, American shad stocks remain depressed until today. A letter to the editor, published in the May 25, 1995 Washington Post, highlighted the closing of the last commercial fishery in Fairfax County. Lewis Hard was touted as the last chapter of what was once the largest industry in the area. The letter went on to mention that perhaps the most industrious fisherman on the Potomac at the beginning of the 20th century was Captain Nietzsche, who owned 3 fisheries along the Potomac at Freestone Point, Stony Point, and Ferry Landing. The 1992 Historical Society of Fairfax yearbook claimed that Nietzsche was the owner of the largest fishing net in the world, 9,600 feet for the net proper, with hauling ropes that stretched 22,400 feet. Nietzsche made 2 hauls per day during the fishing season, which took 7 hours per haul using 8 horses and 100 men. He claimed to have caught 500,000 herring and 10,000 shad in one haul in the same waters that, in the end, killing support Mr. Harley and 2 helpers. Now, since the mid-1990s, there have been separate attempts to repopulate the Potomac with shad and sturgeon. Each effort has had its unique challenges. For shad, the main problem has been imprinting the fish to recognize the Potomac as the tributary they need to return to for spawning. Another issue has been the number of small predators of their eggs and fry that have grown in population since the shad stopped being a dominant part of the Potomac ecosystem. The American Shad Restoration Project wasn't completed until 2002, and while that effort has restocked shad populations in the river, according to the Virginia Department of Game and Fisheries, fishing of the American shad in the Potomac is still many years away. For sturgeon, the Interstate Commission of the Potomac River Basin threw its support behind the Maryland and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Plan to use 60 domesticated Atlantic sturgeon, mostly from New York's Hudson River, to boost the population in the Potomac River. Actually, could I get the next slide? This shows the two dams at Little Falls. This is the earlier one, which was connected to the C&O canal, and this is the current one. Over here, you can kind of see where the fish are supposed to pass, but at times they've been closed off because of other new invasive species that have been introduced to the Chesapeake Bay. So for sturgeon, the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, through its support behind Maryland U.S. Fish and Wildlife Plan, to use 60 domesticated Atlantic sturgeon, mostly from New York's Hudson River, to boost the population in the Potomac River. But the listing of the Atlantic sturgeon as endangered in the Chesapeake Bay means that scientists are not allowed to try to mix domesticated species with their wild cousins. While the Commission is appealing to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Fisheries Service to allow them to restock the Potomac, its stance as of 2013 is not optimistic. Without this intervention, marine biologists predict that it will take a century for the sturgeon to repopulate the Potomac on their own. So, in conclusion, as I've reread this lecture, at times I feel like I've given you more of an overview than an actual argument. And from my time as a teacher, the constant question is, what's the thesis or what's your argument? But I think, to a certain extent, that this overview makes an argument by itself. There are lots of different ways that we can divide history, whether it be by day of year, the address of a building, the last name of a family. And I hope that I made an argument that's worth thinking about natural resources, not only as something to be used or conserved, but as having stories in their own rights. And while I quoted George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, they weren't the focus of this lecture. Ordinary people who worked in the fishing industry and the fish that they caught, processed, and consumed were. Unfortunately, I'm not a marine biologist. I can't tell you what it would take to restore the shad and sturgeon to the Potomac. But I hope that you leave this lecture feeling more informed as to the role of fish in the growth of Alexandria and the effects of human decisions on the viability of the Potomac's natural resources. Thank you. I have to ask, does someone have a pen? Because I'm sure I'm going to have questions. Thank you.
Dan?
Yes.
You see people fish all the time.
I'm sorry?
You
Yes.
see people fishing all the time. What are they basically fishing for? I mean, is it sport? Some of them, I think, are definitely fishing for food.
Okay.
Some maybe for sport, just because they like to fish.
Right.
But,
So the ones that I talked about are supposed to be caught and released.
but the catfish thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can. I'm not sure you would want to, but that's, but yes, I mean, for the most part, commercial fishing as a means of industry on the Potomac is gone since 1993. So,
I have a question about the salting.
yes,
Were all three kinds of fish salted?
yes, although sturgeon are much more difficult because they're much
Well,
smaller.
I'm sure. But it was just your description of the fish being layered in a barrel and a bushel of salt put on them reminded me of how the Romans made garum, which was fish sauce that they put on everything.
Yeah. Yes.
A question about salt also. You mentioned, I think, after the Revolutionary War, salt was going to be made in Portugal.
Yes.
I assume that fairly soon there were sources of salt in the United States. I can't imagine.
It seems to have been a matter of prestige to be able to bring salt, especially from the ocean. So, yeah, initially the English forced the colonists to use salt from Liverpool, and like I said, like that didn't last long enough, not in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality. So, yes, at some point American salt is being used, but really Lisbon salt is what fisheries in this area are trying to.
And then at what point is salt supplemented by ice?
Ice. It seems that as if they're concurrent, as early as the 18th century, some people who can afford it are using ice. It depends on how far you're trying to transport it, or Washington, for example, never really shipped it farther than Philadelphia, whereas other people are shipping it to the West Indies. They're shipping it, for transportation to Natchez, Mississippi, and to New Orleans, and so salt is a much more stable way of preserving it. Yes.
I think that Washington traded shad for salt to Portugal and Spain.
Oh,
That was one, because the shad was so plentiful.
Right.
Now, other areas in the world like shad, they want it.
Not in the same quantity. They do come along the Atlantic coast of South America. But
So we did a new plan with South America and North America here predominantly.
in terms of,
Shad. I mean, it's the world.
I'm sorry, I guess I'm not.
Where was it? I mean, shad was in the Potomac.
Right.
Where else was it?
Oh, it was up and down the East Coast, all the way up into Canada, all the way down to Florida. Yeah.
It was so famous in the 1930s because it's a line in a cold water source.
Yeah.
Yeah, do it.
You see a lot of it in Florida.
Okay.
That's coming in from South America.
From South America.
Okay.
Okay, one gentleman over here, then I'll get to you in just a second.
Was there any indication from records of any pearl button factory or any pearls that came out of these shells? Fish.
Not that I looked at. I was mainly interested in finding things about fertilizer and lime. So I'm not saying that there isn't, but I did come across it. And then there's a gentleman here.
The saline content or the brackish nature of the Potomac, that changed throughout the history? Was that any?
So it seems to have stabilized in 3000 BC, but that's given to me by an archaeologist. Yeah, but it does seem like salinity levels are important for the attraction of certain types of fish. And it has stabilized until the present day.
Were any of these fish exported to Europe?
Not as far as, it doesn't seem like it. These fish are not, other than perhaps Sturgeon, these are not, it's more likely to transport fish from Europe here as a sign of prestige. John Carlisle transported or imported fish all the time. But no, it's not, I mean, I guess perhaps with the exception of if Washington was trading with Shad for salt.
Were any of these named?
Yes. Yes,
So clams and oysters, they don't get them in the Potomac.
they do. I just didn't study. It's harder to find records about them. It's harder to find. They're not using the same techniques.
But they work.
They definitely list here.
So that's next year's topic.
Yeah, you get like lost crustaceans next. Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
There's a sign on Logan's Point that says that the fishery there is 9,000 years old. Tourist sign. I'm just wondering if that's somebody there just exaggerated or it says 9,000 years ago there's evidence of fishery.
Okay, I mean, the largest, or the latest, or the earliest evidence of fisheries seems to be, let's see here, I want to say 3000 BC. So that doesn't, yeah.
Of course, they have drawings and stingrays and sharks and stuff.
That would be possible, but I don't know where they got that number. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for coming.